Hello, good afternoon, everybody, viewers. I'm back today once again with you, and as you might have read or come across the topic that I'm going to talk about today, I have selected two stories, one from Hindi and one from Urdu, and the two writers are one is Mohan Rakesh, and then the other one is Sadat Hassan Manto. The two stories that I would be talking about eventually are Malbe Malik by Mohan Rakesh and Tetwal Ka Kutta by Sadat Hassan Manto. I have my own reasons. You may ask a question here that why did I choose stories which are at least in the context of Manto. This is a lesser known story. This is a lesser known story than the other one, Toba Singh, which is a very widely acclaimed one and perhaps universally acknowledged also as one of the greatest stories that was ever conceived of on this earth. That's I have my own reasons. One of the reasons why did I choose this Tetwal Ka Kutta is to bring to the notice of the viewers that not only this Toba Singh, but there is a story, Tetwal Ka Kutta, which comes close, very to what this Toba Singh ideologically represents in terms of impulses, in terms of banality, and in terms of whatever that Manto could have thought of while trying to express his regret or while trying to lament the division of the country that was broken in eventually in two parts. That I will come to later, because all these aspects will be brought within the ambit of my concern when I start talking about, but then I will begin with a brief background of what really these stories are and why I chosen one from Hindi and one from Urdu, because see, both these stories in two different languages, which are the languages of the subcontinent. Both languages are spoken in India, both languages are spoken on the other side of the fence also. So there is a commonality about it. Not only commonality about this language, the linguistic aspect, but also there is a commonality about what they are in terms of thematic impulses, in terms of what they are philosophically. And the two great languages which are involved here, Hindi and Urdu, had the same kind of anguish to express through the medium of short story. So this is because there Manto and Mohan Rakesh or Manto for that matter, share a troubled history of Holocaust. They could see the horrors of the Holocaust and the way it impacted their psyche. That was a troubled one. So Mohan Rakesh is as much sensitive as Manto is. So we cannot isolate one from the other. So both are equally sensitive, but both were equally affected or impacted or had that kind of sensitivity to be affected by that, by the cataclysmic event what we call partition. I was avoiding the word partition because partition literature has its own paradox. Because why this partition literature has a paradox? Because see, ironically, the best literature lies in partition literature. The best literature of the subcontinent lies in the partition literature itself. So that is also an anomaly of sorts and all that we can go into later on. And anyway, so starting with Mohan Rakesh, as we know, Mohan Rakesh is one of the most prominent writers of Hindi literature, or the writer of the subcontinent to widen the canvas of our concerns. We could say that Mohan Rakesh is no mug, is not an ordinary writer, is not somebody who is very ordinary to be dismissed in a single reading. Mohan Rakesh possibly is one of the most powerful writers from Hindi language or from Hindi literature. Mohan Rakesh possibly conceived this story in a moment of distress, and that distress is very apparent when you read the story Malbe Ka Malik, as the title would suggest itself, that Malbe Ka Malik informs you how the artist perceives this trauma to be, and the manifestation of this traumatic sense, the manifestation of this bruised psychology, the manifestation of this this broken psyche gets reflected in the angst, in the anger of the writer himself. So here, this is a moment of anger on the part of the writer. If you read Malbe Ka Malik, that means you are trying to reconnect yourself to the anger of the writer. You are sharing the anger of the writer, and this anger emanates from that ridiculous background of a vivisection when you had the division of the country, when it was broken in two parts. So that's obviously something very important to go into, and I will go into that. So Malbe Ka Malik I had chosen because this is a story that reminds me, or keeps reminding me about the productive part of his imagination. That how he can connect himself to the story, how there is a strong emotional connect between him and the events of the history. So history finds expression. History finds expression not only in his anguish. History finds expression in his narrative also, which is a very sensitive narrative, which is a very moving narrative, which is a narrative which makes you think and look back. And when you look back, you share what the impulses are. You join him as a co-reader. You join him as somebody who is a part of the same tradition of anguish, who is a part of the same broken tradition of history, who is a part of the same bruised history, that injured history that the subcontinent has. So in that context also it becomes very important. Remember, when I say Malbe Ka Malik, look at this title of the story Malbe Ka Malik. What it says, that Malba is obviously debris, and there is somebody who is going to own that debris. But then that debris is not simply for the heck of it. That debris is not only for a rubble which is there, which has a story buried within its ambit or under it. It has a story buried under it. So how the story goes, Malbe Ka Malik. So remember, there is one character called Ghani who had left Amritsar before the lines of before the division of the country. So he had left Amritsar, gone over to somewhere else, and meanwhile what happens, that this partition comes about. So the lines of political lines are drawn, India becomes India, Pakistan is carved out finally, and then of course that becomes a different, a very independent political entity. What happens meanwhile, that when all these things are going on, then there is Ghani is the character who is away from this Amritsar, who is into somewhere else, and what happens finally, that all these things have happened. Partition has taken place. Amritsar has stayed back in India. He is not there, and after the partition, remember, he decides to come back to Amritsar, because those were the days when you could have chosen, you could have made your decisions, you could have made your choices whether you are going India or you are going to be in Pakistan. So that's what this Ghani had chosen, not chosen to go to leave Amritsar. For a commercial purpose, he was outside Amritsar, and all these things really came about. Then what happens, that some other characters like Manori, then you have Chiragudeen, and then you have Rakha Pahalwan, these three characters who have some very oblique references to them, but then Rakha will keep coming to the forefront of things. Why? Because Rakha is a character. There you will find the real anguish, the real cynicism of what really happened as one of the most ridiculous strokes of history. That there you will come about at something which is that will paralyze your sensibility, something that will leave you completely befuddled, that yes, what really happened. And then Ghani comes back, and then there is a Misri Bazaar in Amritsar. There is a Misri Bazaar in Amritsar, a Misri Bazaar before partition and a Misri Bazaar after partition. It's the same Misri Bazaar. But then things have changed completely. Then Ghani decides to come back to try and relocate his past, try and relocate his roots, try and see whether things are surviving there. He had a house, he had a newly built, newly constructed house he had left. He had his family there. He had a son, he had a daughter, he had a wife. Oh, everybody was there in his family. So he just chooses to come back to see whether there is anything surviving, whether he has a family left, whether he has that house left, whether he has that bond with the history also left and all that. So he decides to go back to Amritsar. While he gets into Amritsar and into the Misri Bazaar, remember, mouths start twitching. Ladies who are out there in the mid of the streets, they somehow suspect that this man is a foreigner, this man is an alien character, he is not known to it. But there are some people who know him. some old people who recognize him as Ghani. And then even then, nobody is coming forward to receive him. People are trying to avoid him. People are running away. There are kids who are being withdrawn from the streets. Playing kids or street urchins who are there on the street, they are being withdrawn from the streets. So everybody is very skeptical about this visit of Usman. Remember, look at the tormented psychology of the people of post-partition. The torment, the psychology here, which is so badly bruised, that somebody who had his house there decides to come back to see whether things are surviving or not, is viewed so skeptically that every movement, every single forward step is being questioned silently. Nobody is going towards him. People are taking evasive actions. They are running away from him. So it is a very pulverizing situation for Ghani. He gets the feel of the whole situation. Well, things have changed. Misri Bazaar has changed. The structure has changed. Things look so different from what they were before the partition actually came about. So, but still he keeps on going because he's trying to find his house. He has a strong and very burning kind of a desire to go and see what really happened to his house or what happened to his family. Nobody tells him anything. Rather, people are running away from him. They are shying away from him. They are trying to shoo him away also. So, remember, there is a duality of responses involved here. The duality of responses will tell you that Ghani is not accepted back into the fold. That's one. He is not accepted back into the fold. Why? Because no longer he is a resident of that Misri Bazaar. And post-partition, he ceases to be a citizen of the country. Post-partition, he ceases to be a citizen of the country. And what happens here? That he loiters around, he looks around, he has some very seriously quizzical and philosophical looks. He looks fatigued, he looks jaded, he looks broken, he looks shattered. And then what happens? That finally he comes across somebody called Manori. Now Manori, remember, is a very important character here. Manori comes about and he recognizes the old man. Oh, and then he goes down to him and says, okay, are you Ghani? He said, yes, I am Ghani. And then after this brief dialogue or brief conversation between the two, Manori takes him to his house. As Ghani wanted to see his house, wanted to visit his house. He goes and then Manori takes him to his house, which is now converted into a debris. The house has disappeared. Only the rubble is left. Only the debris is left. In that Malbe, in that debris, in that rubble, lies the history of his family. In that Malbe, in that debris, in that rubble, lies buried the wounds inflicted by the mindless politics of the time. That mindless politics comes into play. And then Manori takes him to his supposed house that was once upon a time. That was a newly built house, by the way, because he had built it before he left Amritsar. So what happens? He goes there, and remember, that's a very sensitive situation. It's a very sensitive portrayal of that scene. If you could go back to the story and read the text, there you will find that Ghani was trembling from inside. He had shivers. His shin was knocking. His teeth was blanching in terror. So he was trying to piece himself together, regroup himself, and then he somehow darted up and went down to where the debris was. Manori guides him to the debris, say, this was your house, now this is what is left here. That means your house is now just a debris. It's a rubble now, it's converted into a rubble. And remember, you can imagine that somebody who had his house newly constructed gets back to his native place, obviously, to his native place, to his native land, to find that his house has been turned into debris. So that's kind of a reaction that you can only anticipate what would happen, what might have happened to him. Ghani is old. Now what happens when he stands by the debris? And not only does he stand by the debris, what he does, he goes down towards it, sits gradually, takes a step forward, second step, three step, and then he goes into the debris itself. What happens there? Then he positions himself into it. He positions himself into it, and in trying to position himself, remember there are some sensitive touches that he really gets them. There are some sensitive touches, some really very moving touches that he has. He goes, sits on the debris, throws his hand about, gets the feel of the dust of the debris. And that dust reminds him that this is the dust of the door frame which is dissolving into dust. This is door frame which is dissolving into dust. This is some other part of the house. So the house was gutted. The house was gutted in that mindless guzzling of human lives, in that mindless acts of violence prior to the partition. So what happens? He is completely shattered, he is broken, he is into shreds, and remember, tears start rolling. Tears well up into his eyes. They are rolling on down to the cheeks, and now he throws his hand above the debris, gets the feel of the debris as if he is getting the feel of his family. So that's one moment of a very strong emotional reconnectivity with the family that was completely devastated. That is one moment of emotional stress that he survives, because the whole history dangles before his eyes. His family, his daughter, his son Chiragdin was his son, and as the stories say, and as the people say there, that Chiragdin was murdered none other than by the Raka Pahalwan, who happened to be the family friend. So remember, this is what the frenzy of this communal violence turns you. Leaves you with an animalistic response to the crisis. This is a very important part to note. That sectarian violence does not see reason. That sectarian violence does not see any element of rationalism in it. It's like going with the wind. It's like doing what you would have never done with your senses intact. So that's a brazen moment of destruction, of which you are a constituent. You are aiding that destruction. So what happens? Manori takes him to the debris, and then the old man is there for some time. He gets the feel of the debris, and he is completely moved. It's a very touching description. It's a narrative that will really make tears roll out in your eyes. That will make tears gush out from your eyes. And remember, it's a very sensitive portrayal. It's something which is very profound. One moment of a complete sanity which is there on the part of the old man, who is trying to reconnect himself emotionally and psychologically to the family that was murdered, to the family that was the victim of the communal violence, to a family that was the victim of that of bestial communal responses in moments of communal crisis. So you do not blame that I am who is the Hindu or who is the Muslim. That's not the issue was. The issue was that it was an organized response, driven by that hatred to blow up things, going by a religious identity. So that religious identity becomes very the only element that guides you. That's the only thing which guides you, and that's the frenzy of the mob. That's the frenzy of the moment, which completely belittles your common sense, belittles your wisdom, belittles your senses and all that. So what happens? This man, Ghani, is now completely shattered. He's broken, goes into shreds, and he's trying to recollect himself. And after that, he rises gradually. And the way he rises, remember, he rises gradually from his position. And the way he rises, remember, every single movement of his body tells something about his past, tells something about what he is going through, tells something about his shattered existence. So this is a very touching moment for him. As if he is shaking hands with his family members. Where is Chiragdin? He asks Manori. Manori doesn't say anything, though Manori knew that what happened to Chiragdin and who killed Chiragdin. And Raga was the man, Raka wrestler was the man who killed Chiragdin. And because he wanted to use up that house. And remember, this is what happens, that in moments of communal frenzy, there are lumpen elements to get the better of it, who are always the beneficiaries. Not me, not you, not anybody else. But those who wait for such opportunities, let there be a fire, and then they will be only blowing up the fire further to make use of that. So what happens? When he rises up gradually from there, and then he asks Manori to take him to Raka, and then they go to, both of them saunter towards Raga, who is there on about a platform he's sitting on. Then both of them go there, and the moment remember, see, the guilt never spares you. That's what is very important here. That the guilt never spares. You know what you have done, and when you know what you have done, the guilt will never spare you. That complex will always be there. You will be stricken by it. It will hold terrors for you. It will frighten you for the rest of your life. You are never going to be free from it. You know what happened, what you did, and when you know what you did, you are the best judge of how you are going to suffer. You are the best judge of judging your own acts of violence, your own acts of bestiality. So that's the bestial response engineered by a situation that provided you with an opportunity of sorts to do it. So when he goes towards this Raka, and then there is hi and hello and things like that, how are you and all that, and then he asks him what happened to Chiragdin. What happened to Chiragdin? And remember, he was apparently jittery. He was into shreds. He was breathless. So there was a psychological pressure on Raka for coming across this man who he was not able to see into his eyes, because he was the guilty party, because he knew what he has done. And he's also simultaneously is fearful of the fact that Manori might tell him that it was he who killed Chiragdin. But then Manori doesn't do that. He does not tell does not tell Ghani that Raka had killed Chiragdin. And then Ghani also tells him that how it happened. He asks him how it happened. You were a powerful element of the society. You were a powerful element of Mahalla. You were a powerful element of the colony. So I think you were the one who could have secured his life. Look at this paradox being worked out. That somebody who is guilty of the criminal act being hailed as a savior. Ghani thought that Raka would be the person who will provide protection to his son in the event of any crisis. Raka is going to be the person. He had this faith, and how this faith stands completely eroded, how this trust stands completely broken, though he never gets to know that Raka is the man who killed his son. Raka is the man who killed his son, Chiragdin. But then the apparent discomfiture of Raka, he is huffing and puffing, he is breathless, he is into distress, apparent discomfiture. And then see, by that time, but then of course Manori does not tell it to him, nor does it ever become clear to him, to Ghani, that who killed Chiragdin, and he disappears from the scene. And then he wishes everything good to the people. He wishes everything good. He wishes everything good to Raka also, to take care of him, to take a very good care of himself, because these are the very people who were the part of his family. They were as if the members of the family, and these very members of the family turned so hostile. Raka turned so hostile that eventually he did what can only be a blemish on humanity, can be construed as some kind of a serious blemish on humanity itself. And then when he broken, shattered, befuddled, confused, paralyzed, decides to quit the place. He disappears from the scene gradually. And with his disappearance, disappears his past, disappears the history of his family, disappears everything that was about his existence. He is the cold piece of flesh, staggering, falling, and rising. Here what Mohan Rakesh does, Mohan Rakesh probes the psychology of the killers, probes the sectarian violence which snowballs into a major crisis. that mindless acts of violence, that collapse of human wisdom, the death of associations, very emotionally very strong, psychologically very powerful. So all these are completely broken in one act of madness. So that is the moment of madness being proved by Mohan Rakesh. And remember, Mohan Rakesh is no ordinary writer. What he does here, that he doesn't give you any conclusion of what really should have happened. He only suggests that this is what really happened. And remember, this is the blemish. This is going to be, this is something which is very scary for the rest of our existence. Whether it is India or Pakistan, both the nations will be equally disturbed about what happened. So that cataclysmic event cast its shadows, lingering shadows of gloom. That lingering shadows of gloom, they are not that alienable. Even today they are as much inalienable. It has crept into our psychology as much as it was there when it really came about. Though we haven't had much of an access to what really happened. That's why I said that the best literature from the subcontinent, the response of literature, remember this is what the response of literature is. And the best literature we had in our country, in subcontinent itself, lies in partition literature, because you have writers like Mohan Rakesh, you have writers like Manto, you have writers like many progressive writers, writers in Bedi, Kishan Chandar, then you have writers like Kamleshwar, you have writers like Krishna Sopti, Chitra Mudgal, and then Mirdula Gar, so on and so forth, the exponents of the Nai Kahani like Kamleshwar, and Mohan Rakesh himself was an exponent of Nai Kahani. So what here, discourses are always there. You are hounded, you are pounded. And in this very act of hounding and pounding, what you come across a troubled history of existence. So that's a troubled one. And it will remain so. That scar is not going to be wiped up ever from your life itself. It has cast remember, the kind of doom that was cast on earth lingers on. So here you find that anguish. What is this? This right, Malbe ka Malik, what is this? Malbe ka Malik means the owner of the Malba, the owner of the debris. And Rakha wanted to build a house there. Rakha wanted to build a house upon that debris. And he was keeping a vigil on the debris itself, that nobody goes away with it, nobody does anything. But then he also could not get his mission accomplished. And after that interaction with Ghani, Rakha's dreams of constructing a house on that piece of land also dissolves into dust. Is consigned to the dustbin because his confidence is shaken. He loses his clout on the locality itself. He is nervous, he is jittery, he has lost his sheen, he has lost his power. The powerlessness overrides him. So this story is an expression of anguish. This story is an expression of a scar that is inseparable from our history. And therefore, this Malbe ka Malik becomes particularly important in the context of partition literature. It is the narrative that will move you. It has a narrative that will leave you thinking for hours together. So this is what this Malbe ka Malik and Mohan Rakesh did in his story Malbe ka Malik. Now the other story, because remember why I have chosen these two stories. Mohan Rakesh's this Malbe ka Malik and Manto's Ketwal ka Kutab, because ideologically they are very identical, they are very akin. You have the same ire and fire. They analyze the same bestiality, the same absurdity, the same cynicism involved in the acts of whatever is recorded by history. The anguish, the pain, the angst, the suffering, the horrors, the terrors, everything. So you are as much a part of that horror today as anybody in that time could have been, because it is not going to be dislodged from your mind. It is not going to be discarded from your psychology. You cannot dispel it. You cannot say that, well, I know nothing, I am not the guilty party because I was not there. Because it is a collective breakdown of human wisdom. That one moment, every sane nation, remember, every sane nation has a moment of madness about it. It has a moment of madness. Every sane nation, every civilized nation, if you read the histories of the country, you will find that there are moments when they were completely mindless. There are moments when they were moments of madness, veritable moments of madness, where bestiality was at the highest, where savagery was the order of the day. Even we were bestial in our responses. We get divided along the lines that we would generally hate to be doing. But comes the frenzy, comes the moment, and comes the moment of madness simultaneously. This is what the story says. So they share many things in common. Remember, Mohan, Rakesh and Mantu have a commonality about them. So that's what I'm going to identify, that element of commonality. How there is some elements which are very common, some frustrations which are very common, some regrets which are very common, some delights which are very common. And remember, in this process of trying to trace the element of commonality between Mantu and Mohan Rakesh, what I come across is that both had a very soft, tender, sensitive mind and a contumacious temper. A writer cannot survive without developing a temper which is contumacious, which is skeptical. So both were imbued with skeptical tempers, whether it was Mohan Rakesh or Mantu. And Mantu, of course, no questions about him, because you just cannot say that Mantu had legal issues. Mantu was plagued by financial and legal issues. He was summoned to court 3 times for having written some obscene stuff judged by the standards of the time when they really came about. So Mantu is not a happy artist, nor is Mohan Rakesh very happy. Both are disillusioned artists, and both died very young. Mohan Rakesh died at the age of 47 possibly. Mantu died around about the same time. The same number of years I think he had. So both writers dying very young, but leaving their impressions on the sands of time, which cannot be wiped out, which can never be dismissed. They are severe imprints. They are like wounds that will keep licking. So that's what the two writers did anyway. So coming to this another story, which is Tetwal Ka Kutta. Remember, again you have here the same Holocaust being lambasted, and the same absurdity of this political act, what you call partition. The absurdity of the political acts. Here, what I call the absurdity of the political act. Not only the absurdity, here Mantu questions that strong political misjudgment committed by the leaders of the time, or committed by frenzy-induced decisions. Here, both of them question the same. It's a predicament. It is a mystery. It's a puzzle. It is a muddle that they keep going back to. What really happened? And how it really happened? And if it happened, then where were the senses left? Where were the senses left? What was the response of the time when it really came about? On both sides of the border, what really happened? So that political judgment when the one nation was broken into two, when it was balkanized. So this politics of balkanization, where have we really gone to? So one is the angle of that angle is very important. The context is very important. The politics of balkanization. So this balkanized politics comes into play again in this story, Tetwal Ka Kutta. Why? What happens in Tetwal Ka Kutta? There is a dog, which is the central character in this story. And remember, not only that, before that you must know that there are two military posts. One is owned by Indian and the other is Pakistani. And they are bang opposite to each other. And they are apprehending some kind of a military action to be initiated very soon against each other. That means the threat of the war looms large between the two countries. The threat of war looms large. There is impending threat, and both military posts are there. One is owned by one is Indian, the other is Pakistani. And then meanwhile there is a dog. There is a dog who comes across, and the dog keeps crisscrossing. Sometimes it is with the Indian post, sometimes it is Pakistani post. So I will tell you the names which are very important here in this Tetwal Ka Kutta. That Mantovich, who is very borderless, who is frontierless, who is universally acknowledged as one of the greatest story writers of this earth, that who ever appeared on this earth. So that's a part. But then here we'll go into the story to see what really happens in Tetwal Ka Kutta, which did not happen in Toba Tek Singh. Toba Tek Singh, is a no man's land. He says no, he disowns India and Pakistan, both the countries, discards them. In his madness lies the senses. In his madness lies the senses. Here also you demand the same kind of senses and madness through a dog, the imagery of a dog. So what happens? One is what is that? Yes. So Tetwal Ka Kutta, when you have two posts, Indian and Pakistani posts, what happens? What happens is that one post is manned by Subedar. Who is that? Subedar. Just a minute. I think I am forgetting the name. Yeah, Subedar. What is that name? Okay. Harnam Singh. Yes, Subedar Harnam Singh, who is the head of the Indian post, and Jamadar Harnam Singh, who is the head of the Indian post, and then on the other side, which is the Pakistani post, is led by Subedar Himmat Khan. What happens? There is a dog. Okay, the dog crisscrosses. Sometimes it runs towards the military Indian post. Sometimes it runs back towards the Pakistani post. What happens? That one day this dog goes towards the Indian post. And then there are some important questions being raised here because they are Subedar Himmat Singh is questioning the dog. Okay, where did you come from? Where did you go? You were here yesterday, but you didn't. Then you disappeared suddenly. You vamoosed from the scene. Why did you vamoose? And if you vamoosed, where did you go? And the dog is only wagging his tail. The military action is not there. They fire randomly. In the darkness of the night, there is a bullet fired. In the brightness of the morning, there is a bullet fired. There are random bullets fired from both ends, which of course, which is an exercise in futility, which is an exercise in absurdity, because they are protecting their respective military posts, suspecting some attacks. So what happens? The dog, this poor dog keeps running about from one post to the another. And what happens? Sardar Himmat Singh, Subedar, what is that? Jamadar Himmat Singh asked him, where did you go? You were here yesterday. And that means they are suspecting that this dog might be a spy or something of the sort, and then this is something which he disappeared suddenly. So in the act of the disappearance, there was that skeptical temper brewing. They had their doubts. Where did this dog go? Whether this dog is a spy or whether this dog belongs to the opposition camp or the enemy camp. So what they do, they give him a name. Remember, that's a very humorous kind of a explanation there. They gave him a name. Yes, what happens that Sardar, Jamadar Himmat, no, what is his name? Jamadar, sorry, I'm sorry for that because Yes, Harnam Singh. This Harnam Singh gives him a name, and that name is very. Remember, there is something very hilarious about the name. He calls the dog Chapar Junjum. Chapar Junjum. So what is this Chapar Junjum? This is nothing. Is zero. What does it mean? It barely means anything. Chapar Junjum. So in that act of to identify what they give a name to the dog, and they demand loyalty from the dog. That well, you are going to be loyal to us. Don't run away from us. Don't disappear. If you disappear, there will be many questions about you, and we are not going to spare you. So that was the rising political temper. That was the rising doubts on either side of the border. Your actions were suspect. So everything was being suspected as it happens in an atmosphere of war. So what happens that he is called as Chapar Jum Jum. Chapar Jum Jum. So what does it mean? What does it mean, Chapar Jum Jum? It doesn't have any sense. So it's simply, that's also a moment of entertainment, that's also something the name regales them and they burst out. You have chuckles of delight and you have expressions of happiness and all that, and then finally the dog is named. And there is a piece of paper that rolls about his neck. He is christened as, the dog is christened as Chapar Junjum. Chapar Junjum. And then they give them biscuits and offer everything, and the dog keeps wailing his tail and all that, wagging his tail, and then suddenly again disappears. And then he goes back to the another post, which is owned by the Pakistanis. There is a Pakistani military post, and they also come across the same dog, and they ask the same kind of questions. Oh, where you were? You disappeared for a night or so. You don't seem to be very loyal. Many questions by Sardar Himmat Khan, Subedar Himmat Khan. And this Subedar Himmat Khan is also the kind of character who is very hilarious. Both characters, this Jamadar, and then you have his Pakistani counterpart. Both are equally hilarious. Both are equal. They are conceived in. They are basically lightweight characters. In serious business, there is drudgery, there is dullness, there is ennui, there is boredom, there is absurdity. Everything is there. They are questioning what they are for there. Their own existence is meaningless. It is absurd, seemingly absurd. There is no military action to be initiated. The war is not on. But the posts are there. They are hilly regions on the mountains and hills and all that. There is a freezing cold also. Chilling, blistering cold falls about. So things are very murky. What happens when the dog comes across this Pakistani post, and then Subedar Himmat Khan gets that piece of paper from his and removes it from his neck and says, well, check what is there. So what is that on the piece of paper? What is written is Chapar Junjum. And the suspect, is it a message? Is it a coded message? Is there going to be something hostile? Is there going to be some kind of a design? Is there going to be some kind of a plot? Many questions are there tossed up. Many questions are tossed up. And what he says, okay, finally you remove this. And they remove that piece of paper, and other papers really hangs about the neck of the dog. And that is called Sapar Sunsum. Sapar Sunsum. Again, it is a meaningless expression. It has a touch of, it's a kind of a comic relief. It gives you a comic sense rather than to be any grotesque sense of what is going about. So the dog now gets another name, that is Sapar Sunsum. And then what happens? That the dog keeps running about from both this post to that post, this position to that position. And what finally happens? When the dog goes back to the Indian post, they also come across this piece of paper and say, well, no, what is this Sapar Sunsum? There are more questions about that. And finally, this Subedar Harnam Singh is so troubled finally that he is completely peeved. They say, what is this nonsense? Now this is another message from the, maybe from the opposition camp, maybe from the Pakistani military post. So they are on high alert and they are pissed off completely. So what happens? Remember, the whole proceedings are absurd. The whole movements are absurd. There is the dog. And that dog is so confused himself that he keeps running about the two posts. The Indian military post demands loyalty from him. Pakistani post demands loyalty from him. Okay, do not go away from there. You are going to be. And remember, and there is a statement issued that punishment for betrayal is death. Punishment for betrayal, and the dog is warned. There is a toxin being issued in the name of a dog. That come on, you got to behave. You must know it. That betrayal. The punishment for betrayal is death, and the dog is completely paralyzed. He is pulverized. He doesn't know. He only wags his tail and all that. He's horrified. The dog itself is horrified. So, in the image of a dog, remember what is important. It is not dog which is the actions of the dog. The appearance of a dog is, and the doubts and suspicions about him is that degree of skepticism has broken my rhythm. I'm really sorry, and my apologies for having lost that connectivity, because there is something I don't have any control on. So that there are some serious network issues. So now very quickly I will wrap up the story. What happens that Harnaam Singh, in frustration, in anger, fires a bullet that goes past that bullet which sang past the dog's ear, and then the dog is terrified, completely horrified, and then he runs, he'll hear him and scare him. He goes away from hell. Things really now, the dog is completely horrified and says, well, what's going about? Then of course from the other side there is another bullet coming from the other side. Finally, but still the bullet does not hit the dog. What happens that one of the bullets from this Harnaam Singh, Jamindar Harnaam Singh, yes, it does hit his one of the legs of the dog, and then from there he drags on and on and on and on, and finally in a fit of passion, the final bullet is fired, and the dog disappears loses his life completely. So what is that? In this very act of firing and this act of unleashing bullets on the dog, there is a frustration of the military officers. There is the frustration of the military officers, and there is the frustration, there is the anger, there is also anger of what really is going about, because the politics doesn't have a sense of direction, that geography doesn't have a definite sense of identity about it. Though you are carved out, though you are broken into two parts, though you are separated completely, you have a different political identities, but the fact is this, that still none of you reconciled to the reality of a strong political misjudgment. So what the story does here, this story, Tetwal Ka Kutta, tries to justify the errors of history. It's trying to justify the errors of history. That's something very important, because errors of history are being justified here, and obviously that partition was an error of history. You agree, you can disagree, you can have your own point of view. This is something which is can always be evaluated and re-evaluated, and we can have a context and a recontext defined, and a context and there. So that is something which cannot be ruled out from the possibilities of meaning and interpretations and all that. But what Manto does here, Manto here exposes only the absurdity of the militaristic nationalism, this muscular nationalism upon which rested the division of the country, upon which was induced the features in the division of the country, political features which were there. Manto reacts to it, Manto responds to it and says, and finds it equally absurd. So he has that undercurrent of cynicism about his responses. So this cynical response to an equally absurd military action, and that military action finally culminates into the partition of the country, into the vivisection of the nation. So that separates you politically. That is a realignment, a political realignment that is being castigated, that is being brought to within the line of fire by Manto. So Manto reaches out to the echoes of absurdity, to the echoes of your nonplussed mind, that you are not in a position to react the way your wisdom advises you to react. So there are some issues. Obviously this political meaninglessness is also there. There is the meaninglessness of the political actions too are involved there. So a host of issues are there. That's why I said that Tetwal Ka Kutta is a lesser known story, where the imagery of the dog presses the message home that, well, even an animal, remember, regardless of the boundaries he belongs to, is demanded loyalty from. So, and therefore the dog was not able to establish his nationalist credentials. His credentials as as a very trustworthy citizen of any part of the two military posts, and therefore he dies a dog's death. This is what the conclusion of the story is. Ladies and gentlemen and my viewers, I must say that both stories only expose the absurdity of political judgments and a cynical reaction to the errors of history. That's what it is very important to note, that the error of the history and the absurdity of political judgments, that even today we are sitting, we are resitting, we think, we rethink, we evaluate, we reevaluate, and what we try to do is to find reasons. Again, some of the responses will be very unconvincing. That's leave it to history alone, because historical judgments and misjudgments are always there, and we are here because we have writers like Mohan Rakesh and Mantu who will question your political tempers, who will question, who will renounce, who will denounce, who will denunciate. They have a questioning political temper. This is very important to know. Both Mantu and Mohan Rakesh have a questioning political temper. They question, what is this madness? What is this banality of actions? This banality, this, remember, both are imbued with a contumacious temper. So this insurrection comes into play through the stories, through their art. And this art really moves you. These stories are not statements issued in frustration alone. These stories are re-evaluation of the troubled psyche, of that tormented psychology, of that emotional distress that you keep coming across every day. So this is what politics does. Here, both the writers castigate politics and political acts and call them as errors of history, which they cannot correct, which they cannot justify. They don't justify. They are only questioning. Of course, the powers that be from time to time and the successive governments will let you know what it's all about. But both the stories are very sensitive. And remember, that's why I said that the best literature of the subcontinent lies in partition literature. You go to Khushwant Singh, you go to Mohan Rakesh, you go to Mantu, you go to Krishna Chandra, you go to Rajendra Singh Bedi, you go to any other writer for that man, even from across the borders, like writers like Intezar Hussain, Mumtaz Mufti. These guys. Remember, the best thing, Aziz Ahmad, Kali Raat, Aisi Bulandi, Aisi Pasti, Khuda Ki Basti, Basti, these all will tell you the narrative, very, very, very horrifying, and you will start huffing and puffing, you will be completely hounded. The horrors that they will hold, they entail even today. I'm not trying to recast the doom on earth. What I'm trying to do is to see the dynamics of imagination involved in the process of creativity, and how this Holocaust becomes gets converted into an opportunity for the highest kind of arts, that you reach. So both Mantu and Mohan Rakesh deserve kudos and some strong accolades for having written stories and for spinning narratives which can hold you spellbound, and they are really very spellbinding. They are masterpieces in the sense that they make you think, they make you sit on the edge of your chair, and that is something very important as an artist. For any artist who can really do it, who manipulates his story without interfering with his own political senses, without trying to say you how you have to react to the story. You can react on your own, guided by your rational senses, and then there you will find that what the story really tells you. So both these stories are very sensitive, they are very touching, they are very moving, they are very profound in the final analysis. And I hope, I'm sorry for that temporary loss of connectivity, because you remember these are the things you cannot have any control on, and since you cannot have any control on, there will be momentary lapses of connectivity, in terms of connectivity, that you keep losing. I hope the two stories are dealt with, and if you have any questions, you can post your question now, because I am here. And thank you very much, viewers, for being with me this long. And if you have any questions, you have any clarification that you wish to seek from me, or you want to seek from me, that I am here to respond or to react to your queries, to your questions, whatever they are, if you have any. Because I think these two stories you must go back to, because as a matter of advice as well, a piece of advice just for the readers or for the viewers who are there, so, that if you read these two stories, I think you will be convinced that you cannot have better stories written in any other language. You cannot have better stories. You cannot have stories which can really make you move. We can make you go back to your literary trouble and brood over it for hours together. It is both a grace, it is both and a disgrace. So it is an emblem of the two. It blends, it agglomerates your own wisdom with your intellectual sagacity, with your intellectual judgments that you can always make on your own. If I am not getting any question, then of course I am afraid I think people are not there, or have they really left. I am sorry for that temporary loss of connectivity once again. But then remember one thing, one final word, that we have to read stories like this. We must read Bantu, we must read Mohan Rakesh and all other writers who wrote during partition and after. Remember, because they provide you insights into that very bruised psyche of the time that was traumatized, the paralysis of the time that we can always keep going back to. So thank you very much, viewers, for being with me, and I am really beholden to you for sparing your time, for sparing your attention. So kind of you. Take a very good care of yourself. Just stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you very much.